back, everybody. It is the Working Brother back at you with another talk. And have we got a special one for you today? As you can see on screen, we've got two guests that have never met before. We've got Drago Bosnic and George McMillan III. Regular viewers will know both are regular guests of mine. And now we have the amazing technology to have two guests on screen at the same time for this amazing comedy. By the way, this is a comedy show. Nothing we say here has anything to do with reality. Now that that's out of the way, Drago, George, you want to introduce yourselves? Talk to each other maybe?
Yep,
so I can show off my different scenes here.
George.
George?
Okay, yeah. I'm a former private military contractor, and I'm a geopolitical theorist, apparently. We were talking before, we've been going over the sea power versus land power theories lately on Working Brother show. And before that, I've gone over the power center theories of Kennan and Brzezinski and Wolfowitz and the Rand reports and Fiona Hill and the fake Rand reports on Working Brother since December of 2022. And yes, it is. Those frameworks of analysis are so vital to understand what's occurring. The Trump administration, what we were talking about before with the Kellogg administration, is absolutely dead on arrival. I've been talking about that on Energy Newsbeat since at least January 8th, because I was back and looking at my different postings on my different chat, private chat groups, that all Putin has to do is do nothing, because he doesn't sell any more gas to the West. The EU, well, the economy's collapsed, the energy prices soar, the economy's collapsed, and he can get rid of the EU and NATO. And now, since Trump is trying to deal with Putin from a position of strength, he's actually in a position to do nothing and let the Trump administration fall. And the reason why I'm saying that up front is because if Trump gets blamed for losing Ukraine, NATO, and the EU by the legacy media before the midterms, then the Democrats take over both houses of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives, and then they're just going to impeach Trump going into the second half of his term. And then they can control the 2028 elections and then reach the single party socialist state. So if Putin doesn't talk to Trump.
Hold on, George. It's only the third minute of the video.
I know.
It's only the third minute of the video. Relax.
They're getting the bottom line up front here. If Putin does nothing, all of that happens. Anyway, go right on ahead, Drago.
Yeah. I mean, it is an interesting point of view, because the legacy.
Wait. Before you discuss that, introduce yourself to people who may not know you.
Sorry,
we're still at the introduction part.
I'm a geopolitical and military analyst. I write for BRICS, and and of course, I think the people who have been watching the Working Brother programs certainly know who I am, and they certainly know who George is. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting him yet, so this is a great opportunity. I've been following, George's work for years, and it's always a pleasure. I mean, you don't meet a lot of very well informed people who understand how geopolitics works.
Thank you. I'll send you the payment later for saying that.
where the fuck's my payment? Excuse my French.
I don't get a lot
by
of
the way,
lately.
By the way, you can buy me a coffee. Link in the description.
All right, I'll do that. All right.
And you can also buy my praises if you like. So.
Okay. Hey, I told you I had at least a dozen fans, and he's one of them.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know what you're talking about, unlike the talking heads of the legacy media. So.
Oh, it's unbelievable, because Trump picked his staff basically out of the legacy media, and you have the propaganda on the legacy media because yes, BlackRock and Vanguard own the shares of stock to legacy media, and obviously their scripts are written for them. And the reason why I keep on going over those 4 levels of warfare on that strategy bridge chart is because the grand strategic level of warfare is not in the government. It's in the private sector that tells the government what to do. So it's always interacted with the Pentagon level and the intelligence agencies ever since Sullivan and Cromwell and the Brown Brothers Harriman law firms in Wall Street during the 1920s and 30s. So it's always been that way. We always have, democracy is a dual egoistic vote. Democracy and capitalism is dual egoistic ideology. You vote in your self-interest and you spend your money in your own self-interest. So that's how our system works. It's always private sector influenced. But the degree now that the oligarchs control the institutional levels of warfare is mind-blowing. So now the generals are repeating the rhetoric and don't know what the sea power versus land power strategies are. So they can't differentiate between the rhetoric and the strategic line of thinking. That's mind-boggling. That's what's come up with this Kellogg plan and what Hegseth was talking today in the Ukrainian Defense Contact Group.
Yeah, and Trump now has a lot of these Iran war hawks, just like he had these Venezuela war hawks during his first administration. So it certainly is an issue because, I think he's going to push back because he doesn't have the military to accomplish what Bush did in 2003. So, but of course, they will keep pushing for war with Iran because they understand that a war with Russia is unwinnable, but a war with Iran is it's not really winnable. I don't think it's winnable unless you use nuclear weapons, but I think it's far more viable than a war with Russia, which is why it's still on the table.
Yeah, working brother, if you can throw up a map real quick of Iran. You don't have time to throw up an ethnic group map of Iran, but I'll just call it off the top of my head, because the reason why the whole thing is over natural gas, getting the Caspian Sea natural gas and not routing it through Russia, but routing it underneath the Caspian Sea. So they couldn't break apart Russia. So it's a whole bunch of separate oblasts. And China's too strong. So now Iran is the weakest link for access into Central Asia.
Yep.
So that's why they have to destroy Iran. They talk about destroying the Russian nuclear sites, and I had a whole bunch of maps on a different slide set, but we don't have time to bring that up. But
hold on, I'm looking through the maps. There's a ton of maps here.
Okay. Oh, you have it from before. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the strategy here, and what's very, very important in the history of U.S. foreign policy, is during Operation Cyclone by Stansfield Turner and Zbigniew Brzezinski, they had a regime change destabilization project in Central Asia with General Zia al-Haq from 77 to 87. So that was a destabilization strategy, and they're funding the Sunni violent extremist organizations under the rubric of the Mujahideen to destabilize that region. And the global war on terror, GWAT, the idea was to replace that whole thing with regime change nation building project, which failed. So with the pullout of Afghanistan, and I was there in Kabul in August of 2021, it was clearly back to regime change destabilization program and funding the different VEOs. That's the part that if you watch the Sean Ryan show and you watch all those people trained at the tactical and operational levels, they don't get that there's rogue elements within the different discrete communities that are funding those Sunni VEOs. Okay, I'm doing correlation, not cause, because wherever there's a Russian or Chinese infrastructural project, there happens to be a color revolution or sabotage, or in case of Ukraine, an outright war, a proxy war. So it's very important that people understand they went back to Operation Cyclone. Whatever they call it now, I got no idea. But it's back to that. So now the weapons have been transferred from the Taliban to the Sistan Baluchistan. The Baluch, it used to be back in the 70s, the Baluch Liberation Front. Then it became the Baluch Liberation Army when the different communist names were common. But then in the GWAT era, okay, it's going to be their children and grandchildren, right? But it's the same groups. It became Jayshal Idol. So our gun trucks, according to Caspian report, naming open sources here, our gun trucks happened to end up in Sistan Baluchistan with Jayshal Idol. All right, so clearly, when they bomb Iran, they're not just going to hit the nuclear sites, they're going to do a battlefield shaping operation. The reason why I say that was in mid-January, the Jake Sullivan and Netanyahu, their people anyway, both talked to Donald Trump, president-elect. Now, if they were just going to do a quick hit on their nuclear sites, well, Trump wouldn't take office for another month and a half. Why would you involve Trump? If you're just going to do a 24-hour strike, well, then just do it. It only affects the Biden administration, doesn't affect Trump administration. But if they're going to do a widespread battlefield shaping operation, then that would destabilize Iran into Trump's term. So no, the Israelis wanted to make sure that Trump was on board or not on board. Okay, he was not on board at the time, operative word. So what's going on here? They can't do an attack on Iran because the Zagros mountains are too high. So they have to use the proxy groups inside Iran. And yes, Israel has been operating in Afghanistan, from what I hear, from Telegram, of course, on the Afghanistan side of the border, but plus they've been dealing with Azerbaijan in the Armenian war.
Yep.
So clearly they're funding the Jayshal Idol group in Sistan Baluchistan, and they're also working with the Azeris and Kurdish people, and they reinserted the Mujahideen al-Haq, the MEK, back into there. So I'm just going to take a wild guess and saying that they're going to do a large-scale battlefield operation, destroy the IRGC, and encouraging an uprising. Just a wild guess from looking at ethnic group, religious, and linguistic maps of the. Oh, there you go. You got it up on the screen now.
Yeah. Another thing that's very important that a lot of people don't talk about is and I think I mentioned it a million times by now, the W76-2, which is the very low yield nuclear warhead that can be installed in most of the submarines and other American delivery systems. And this thing is like 2 to 7 kilotons, which is like, I don't know, 3 to 10 times less powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. So this thing is unusable in a war against a superpower like Russia or China, but it is usable if you lower the yield and you lower the threshold of use. That's pretty logical, and I think the fact that they've deployed this weapon to the Middle East, it indicates that they are ready to use it against Iran. They might even say it's not a nuke. They might say, oh, it's a high yield explosive, conventional explosive or something. But anyway, this thing can wipe out a base with 10,000 soldiers. It's not going to cause a lot of fallout, but the point is, like, it can be used in a so-called conventional war, as the Pentagon says. And these things are in the Middle East, and a lot of people are not talking about it. Like, the only logical.
I think of myself as someone who follows the news, and this is the first time I'm hearing about it. So yeah, you're saying that the nuclear sharing agreement that they tried to get all the Latvian countries to do, and the Poland is so happy about hosting nuclear weapons on their territory, they've gotten some Arabs to do now?
Yep. I mean,
they're on
but the point is, like,
boomer
these things don't need to be in bases, like, you know, on the mainland. You can put them on an aircraft carrier. You can put them on submarines. Like, a submarine is even better because you can fire this thing from a submarine, and you know, apart from the Russians and those other countries with early warning systems, nobody's gonna, you know where that thing came from. Like, you could pull out all of your carrier groups out of range from Iranian air bases or any other military bases. You can just send a submarine and fire an SLBM, and, you know, nobody apart from the Russians and possibly the Chinese will know what sort of weapon you used. And you know, the issue for the U.S. is it doesn't have the military it had 20 years ago. You don't have like 250,000 people who are going to be ready to go against a country like Iran. And the point is, the Iranians have a massive, you know, conventional military, which is far more powerful than anything the U.S. has faced since the Vietnam War. And you know, that sort of military cannot be defeated head on. You need to use asymmetric advantages of the U.S., and of course that also includes nuclear weapons.
George?
Yeah, right. There's you have a map in there. I have a map of all in that slide deck of where they think that the Iranian nuclear sites are.
Mm-hmm.
So most of them are underground. So yeah, you would have to. Well, they're buried into the Zagros Mountains. Yeah. There you go. So if they were just going to do strikes, they would try to hit those things with, you know, repeatedly until they can cave them in, because they're way underground, which is going to be very difficult. But yeah, that became viable for the Israelis to do somewhat. Well, they still need a lot of help after the fall of Assad, and they could move their forward operating bases much farther to the east in Eastern Europe. I mean, in Eastern Syria. I mean,
They already have. They've already set up bases inside Syria, and moreover, to like give more credence to your theory, the U.S. has for the first time approved MOABs, as in the mother of all bombs, to the Zionist to the aircraft carrier that's unsinkable in the Middle East.
Right.
They've deployed it. Yeah.
So what they would
go on.
Yeah, you mean to the sole democracy in the Middle East, man? Don't be racist.
The oldest democracy. Go on, George.
Right.
The oldest profession are you talking about? Democracy, I mean. Democracy.
Oh, damn. George, your subtle humor is getting better over the years. Like subscribers will know. But yeah, that was good. That was good. The oldest democracy profession in the professional democracy in the world, in the Middle East for sure.
Yeah. So there's a wild card that that unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Middle East. You know, the one that was developed by Herzl, you know, that one was, you know, because we're into geopolitical theorists, right? Theodore Herzl is just one of them, the guy from Basel. Anyway, yeah, they can fly east, and if they do have access to certain bases in Afghanistan, yeah, they can fly over, bomb, reload, refuel, and fly back across and forth. I guess that's the plan. I don't know. To what extent that's going to be allowed to happen, I don't see how the Chinese would allow that to happen. Certainly the Russians won't happen. And just for the viewers that haven't really been watching the show, they've got to, the whole idea of GWAT, okay, I know it's going to blow people's minds. It wasn't about building democracy in the Middle East. Everybody knows it's about taking over the oil fields in some way. But most importantly, it's about taking over the pipeline routes. That's the part people don't get. Because natural gas is very efficient by pipeline. If you have to convert it to LNG, it starts to get, it just loses its value. It just costs too much. It's too inefficient. you lose 8% in gasifying it, regasifying it in the atmosphere. So then it no longer becomes clean burning. Then it actually increases, the pollution rather than decreasing it. So the second, the whole liquefaction, regasification process completely defeats the purpose of using natural gas in the first place.
George, we've had Drago, but George is taking the lead here since he started, so I've got to slow him down a bit. Too much humor is not good for anyone. Anyway, I was going to say, Drago and I have a bunch of articles that he's written that we usually get through, and we've decided to take you along for the ride. So I'm going to get to getting to those articles. Where is my both plus TV? Romanians firmly refuse to be the next cannon fodder in NATO's endless wars. This is from January 15th, so this is almost a month ago now.
This is
as we record this. As everything is that we discuss here, Drago, so that's perfectly okay. Do you want to tell us what this article is about, and maybe get George's take on why they don't want to die for NATO?
Yeah, well, it's about, of course, the Calin Grigorescu, who is who was supposed to be the president of Romania. He was actually going to win the election, but of course he wasn't democratic enough, so they got another person, they had to ban the election essentially, and then Thierry Breton, who is one of the former EU commissioners, he went on TV and said, "Oh, we're going to ban any non-compliant political party in any member state, including in Germany, just like we did in Romania." And then Romanians, being all autocratic, they decided to rebel against, the EU dictatorship, essentially, that is determining their fate instead of themselves, because they're the ones who are doing the voting, right? And they're the citizens of the country. There was a protest, of course, in Romania that was against all this. Funnily enough, it didn't last very long because, when the US aid is not involved, protests tend not to be persistent. So
I got a meme about that. Hold on. And then we can tie on to the meme with something useful from USAID. Actually, well, useful is subjective. But George, you might want to see this also. Look, this is the Serbian protests. This is when USAID existed. And this is the Serbian protests last weekend, when after USAID kind of like died out.
Yeah, somebody would say that we are conspiracy theorists, right?
George, your take?
Oh, I just do correlations of facts. we're correlating the shutting down of USAID, and the diminishing protest activity, because they're peaceful protests.
Right. Probably has nothing to do with each other.
Yeah. There might be a correlation there. We just can't figure it out.
Yeah. It's very difficult.
Speaking of stuff from USAID, we've got this lovely graphic here about the minerals that Zelensky is trying to pawn off. We've got lithium, strontium, zirconium, scadium, and other ones. Barium, I think that was over there. My chemistry is not as good as it used to be, and I originally thought this was in English, but it is obviously not in English. It is in Russian. So much for reading that, but there are things that can be gleaned from there. George, how do you feel about this map? Should I go find the map of resources in Ukraine?
No, we're good. We're totally good on that. I've seen them before. I used to always, when I was at university, like decades and decades ago, I picked up a Hammond's map that has minerals in the world. They're all color coded and where they are in a big atlas map. I need to buy another one because my last one is still in Kabul. So I'm sure that the Taliban are putting it to good use. But anyway, yeah, they could have. they could have just had, they could have bought those materials, just through the old market mechanisms. But the whole idea of moving the EU east, and the whole idea of moving trading blocks east, and supporting the oligarchs in the east back when they switched from communism to market economies, was to put oligarchs in place so the money from these things would go from the oligarchs that are easy to control, then to Wall Street and the City of London. Okay, really the City of London. So the whole idea of why they moved NATO east immediately ahead of NATO, and then brought NATO with them, because they obviously need to bring armed guards, but was to put everything in the purview of the oligarchs, so the profits would go to City of London. So all those dependency schools of thought and structural schools of thought, they're all very accurate as far as that goes. But if they wanted, people have to understand, if they wanted free trade, they could have gotten homegrown Ukrainian companies and a whole bunch of different ones, okay, with joint ventures, of course. And then the profits would have stayed in Ukraine to develop Ukraine. That's not what they did. Richard Arty's book on the mineral development of Africa, his 1994 book, nicknamed the resource curse theory, it was about how Western multinational corporations move into these countries. They pay off dictators on purpose so they can do what I just said, extract the profits and reinvest the profits on City of London, basically, more than Wall Street. So instead of, like George Orwell's book, he wrote it because that's what needed to change. Oh no, they used it as an owner's manual, and they replicate this everywhere. So here it is in Ukraine. Now Zelensky is offering these materials, acting like they weren't available by regular economic mechanisms before. Oh no, they were always available through normal economic development mechanisms. Through the Wolfowitz plan and the Brzezinski plan, they went to a great effort to create this war to steal. It's just theft. That's all it is. It's just outright theft.
Russian propaganda.
I hate to deal with the Marxists on this, but because I'm Austrian school, but no, it's the dependency school people are right about this. It's to redirect. It's to redirect the profits to Wall Street. That's all this thing's about. So now Zelensky is saying that he can do it by regular economic mechanisms. Well, they could have done that before a couple million people died and got dismembered.
Yeah. I just want to mention that one of the hurdles to get all the resources that we're mentioning is one particular substance called this Iskanderium. It's a very, very big problem for those who are trying to get the resources that you talked about.
Are you making an Iskander joke?
Yeah, that was supposed to be a joke.
I thought you were talking about either a place in Turkey or a camshaft maker here in the United States.
No, it's a Russian missile, 1,000-kilometer range,
All right.
newly updated. I was gonna say, where is my both plus TV? We've got the next article here on the BRICS portal. George, you're falling into the deep end of Russian propaganda now. Who is the actual culprit? New evidence about Azeri plane crash. Tell me more, Drago. What is the TLDR version of this article? Because nobody's got time to read this other than people who actually read.
Of course. Well, it turned out when they got the black box, it turned out that the Russians actually tried to reroute the Azeri plane that crashed to other airports, but they've refused. And then the Ukrainian drone strike started, and then they couldn't land because the Russian air defenses were working on the drones. And then the whole point is the Azeris are now playing this blame game with Russia, And the Russians are not very happy about it because they know, I mean, the Azeris know the Russians didn't do this on purpose. Like, there were also dozens of Russian citizens in the airplane, so like there was no point for them to, to shoot it down just out of the blue, just because they don't give a damn. The point is, it was an accident, obviously, because nobody really shoots down airliners on purpose unless they're crazy. So what really happened here is that it was an unfortunate incident because it happened during the Ukrainian attack. Drone strike. So the interesting thing is the Ukrainians are pushing this, that that it's the incompetence of the Russians that actually brought this this incident. But the point is, they're just, of course, using that to create havoc on the Russian border in the south, because they believe if there is a conflict between Azerbaijan and Russia, that of course the Russians would have to send a part of their forces there. So they're desperate. They want to do anything, and that's why they're pushing for this campaign of blaming Russia for the Azeri plane crash. But of course, like the new evidence shows that it wasn't Russia's fault. It was the fault of those who continue to target civilian infrastructure across Russia, and specifically the western and southern part of Russia. As for the Azeris, yeah.
Well, they want to stop two things. The international north-south trade corridor that, again, I've been talking about with Working Brother for a couple of years now. And the other one is, as those pipelines deals are being cut off in Poland and Ukraine, sequentially, they're rerouting more gas through Turk Stream into Turkey, but also the Dagestan to Baku pipeline. And yeah, I've been to Baku a whole bunch of times. And there's a whole bunch of flights that fly out of Hyder Aliyev Airport, International Airport, to all over that region every single day. How come that one flight is shot down? Yeah, they confused it with the drone attack going to Dagestan to disrupt their IAD system. IADs are integrated air defense systems. Their radars integrated with SAM sites, surface to air missile sites. So IADs and SAMs. It's to confuse that system so it shoots down a plane on purpose. So yes, that was absolutely done on purpose. And looking at this stuff on LinkedIn, written by people inside the DC Beltway, they're like, "Oh, the Russians shoot down a plane." It's the Russians are evil. Then they made it fly all the way over someplace else, and they leave out the simultaneous drone attack. If you know how those systems work, and you know how to confuse them, they did everything that they possibly could do to confuse them.
Oh yeah, so certainly. And the black box info confirms what you're saying. Like the black box info was 100% on point with that. So yeah. Yeah, there were so many lessons learned in the Azerbaijan-Armenia War of 2020 using drones to fool the IAD SAM systems. Yeah, that's where that came from. And then, the Sunni violent extremist groups.
Time out. Before you get into the Sunni violent extremist organizations again, we've heard like 7,000 times about the Sunni violent extremist organizations, but you were just mentioning Armenia, and Drago's next article from January 17th is
hold on. No,
U.S. Wait, no.
Because,
okay, fine.
No, let me finish it, because they've been funding them. They've been funding them in Dagestan and Chechnya for decades, and people don't know that these groups have been funding by the people from the Arabian Peninsula have been heavily funding those Islamic separatist groups in Chechnya and Dagestan since the fall of the Berlin Wall. Really, as part of Operation Cyclone again, or whatever they call it in that area. It means the same thing. So you already have a lot of confusion in that area. And then they hit it with the drones to confuse the IAD SAM systems. See, the Western media leaves that out too. I just wanted
not to mention that it's also possible that manpads that made their way from the newly democratic Republic of freedom-loving Syria could have like, you know, because, you know, Turkey is right there, could have made their way to like these places that are near where this plane was hit. But let's not even get into that. This is what I was going to ask Drago to tell us about. U.S.-Armenia signed strategic partnership agreement as Azeri invasion looms. Tell us more, Drago.
Yeah, if you thought that the Pashinyan regime was insane, well, you thought wrong. There's no word to describe it, what sort of idiots they are. Because what they did is they signed this strategic partnership agreement with the U.S. on the last several days of the Biden administration. So they did this, you know, just essentially to poke the bear, and they're not going to get anything out of it because Trump is certainly not going to, you know, honor agreements that Biden signed unless he sees some interest in that for himself or for the U.S. or for the deep state, whoever. So, you know, the Armenians are just getting themselves buried even more into troubles that they cannot get out of because, you know, they're losing their only ally in the region and they keep antagonizing everyone around them. And I mean, the Iranians are certainly not going to be happy about a strategic, you know, partnership agreement between one of their neighbors and the U.S. And the interesting thing is most of the weapons that the Pashinyan regime is buying now is from India, partially from France, but also from India. And guess where those, which country, you know, provides the transit routes to get those weapons from India to Armenia? Yeah, you guessed it, Iran. So Iran, what it can do now is can just block them. And the Armenians, who are actually in a very dangerous situation, cannot even get the weapons that they are trying to acquire. So, yeah, that's. I mean, it's crazy. You know, I never in a million years I would have thought that Georgia would have been the smarter country in this case because, you know, they told the EU to screw themselves and just you know, to go pound sand, while they are just burying themselves. You know, the Armenians are just burying themselves into an even worse position. So I really have no idea what they're trying to do, unless it's suicide. Then it makes sense. George, like a suicide really makes sense.
George, you want to give us your take about what you think is going on in Armenia and why this just happens to be happening on Russia's southern border?
Yeah, I mean, the Turks and the Azeris, of course, want to run their pipelines through the Zangezur.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the Armenians, I mean, the Iran doesn't want that because they don't want that separation. I mean, my suggestion would be go ahead and let the Turks and Azeris build a pipeline and a railway or whatever. Just build it 20 feet off the ground so they can drive through and not stop in. Because, yeah, otherwise the Turks and the Azeris just want the Armenian people gone because they want to use that for pipeline routes. So I'm like, okay, build it 20 feet above ground or something and let them do their pipeline. So at least they're not going to want to just genocide the people, because if they can't get their pipelines through, well, then they'll just.
Okay, looks like George's internet provider didn't like you saying that word 3 times. We're not talking about the aircraft carrier. We're talking about Armenia. So we're using the G word with a different meaning here. But
it's no secret. It's no secret that they get their oil and LNG from Seyhan port. Well, now.
George?
Now I'm just going to build a pipeline. Yeah, no, my internet's good, I think. Here, let me shut some things off, just in case.
I don't know, but you cut out twice during that little speech. Maybe we should move on from Armenia. What do you think, Drago? Do you second that? Let's move on from Armenia. Why Russia won't tolerate UK, French, or any NATO peacekeepers in Ukraine? Drago, you want to tell us the outline?
Yeah, I wrote that on January 20 because at the time we had all this speculation about the Trump's peace deal, and that it included supposedly 200,000 peacekeepers from NATO countries, specifically the UK and France. And I wrote an article writing essentially positing that there's no way the Russians would allow peacekeepers from two countries which are essentially parties to the conflict, because both French and UK special forces were in Ukraine, and many of them got killed because the GRU is doing its work properly in this case by directing hypersonic and ballistic missiles at
when you say we're in Ukraine, you mean like the borderlands of Russia, because they were also in Kursk, from what I understand, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. They were also operating in Kursk. So the idea that these guys are, neutral or that they could be peacekeepers is ridiculous. It's essentially allowing an enemy of Russia to, set up camp in Ukraine along the line of contact. And of course, that would be a way for them to stop Russia's advance. And of course, the Russians were not having it.
George, did you think there was any chance of NATO, or do you think that there's any chance of NATO peacekeepers in Ukraine?
Oh, the whole Kellogg plan, just like I've been saying for over a month now, it's just dead on arrival. There's, the whole thing started because they moved offensive weaponry into the Azov Sea area and threatened Russia's only warm water port. So that's what is, it's a pre-attack indicator. If you mobilize, men and material, and you put it through very, very sensitive infrastructure, because you got the Russian Black Sea Fleet that's been in Crimea since 1783 with Catherine the Great, and Russia's only got one southward flowing river in the Rostov River, where all their main mineral and agricultural exports flow out of. Well, that's just where they put the tanks, the armored trucks, the artillery pieces, and the rockets right next to that area. And then they're surprised that Russia makes a military response. So now they're going to use the peacekeepers to put more of that offensive weaponry in the same area. I do not think Russia is going to go with that. Russia's been very clear, since last year. If they want the war stopped, it's up for the West to unilaterally move that stuff out of the area. And so that's been the ball is in Trump's court. Where Trump is getting misadvised about is, yes, apparently Trump still thinks that Russia attacked for no reason rather than pre-attack indicators, because Trump's a real estate guy. He's not a tactical guy. He's not he's not a military guy. He doesn't know the difference. So clearly they bamboozled the guy. Trump's very good everywhere else. I'm so glad he got elected, because I got a lot fewer. My problems went down when he got elected. They didn't go up. Okay, let me put it that way. But they didn't go away either. So there's no way that Putin can allow that, because again, you're putting. Well, how long have the Brits been trying to prevent Russia from getting a warm water port? That's 3 centuries now. You're not talking about since 2014 or 2022. You're talking about 300 years now. So it's not new. It's still to keep Russia from getting a warm water port. So no, they cannot allow that. And again, if Putin just keeps his people right where they are, where the line of contact is, they keep feeding Ukrainians into it. He's got the ability now to bring down the EU, NATO, and Trump if the populist parties win the Danube River Valley elections, because it's not just Georgescu in Romania. Okay, Siamandu, the Harvard-educated person, has won the election in Moldova in October, so she's got 4 more years left. But the parliamentary elections come up this year. They have to have them at least by July 11th, I believe. And that's going to go populist. They want to, their energy prices are soaring. They want to go back to Russian natural gas from the Turkish pipelines that go around the Black Sea that direction. And right now they can't have those either because those are trying to get stopped. So
now I'm
if Putin does nothing,
I'm going to steer us back, George. I have to steer us back to Drago's next article. What Trump's inauguration guest list means for EU bureaucratic dictatorship. What?
This was also like old news now because, of course, the inauguration was nearly a month ago. Well, it means bad news because all of those guests from Europe were all so-called right-wing populist parties, including the AfD, and also some French populists. So what that means is Trump has actually picked his side in the EU's political arena from the get-go, from the very first day of the administration. This is a clear message to the Brussels, to the bureaucrats in Brussels. You are my enemy. That's what he said. And in that regard, it shows us that the future of the EU is essentially hanging in the balance. And of course, this is a good thing because the EU is not a good organization. It's a bureaucratic, neoliberal, extremist organization that is promoting all these so-called values that normal people find repulsive, and it's also using all member states as neo-colonies because Europe has become incapable of projecting power outside of Europe itself. So they need Western European countries need Eastern European countries to serve as neo-colonies, and this is what the EU is pretty much about. And Trump has actually shown support, very clear support for all these, sovereigntist options in the most powerful EU countries, including Germany with the AfD.
Which, George, is what you were saying is basically the only solution left for Europe, right? Because energy prices are driving their popularity, so supporting them seems like a no-brainer, right?
Oh yeah. And what I argued in the Energy News Beat article that I just put out, and I need to follow it up with some more, which I wouldn't get done if I wasn't, on doing podcasts and stuff. But
this is not a podcast. This is a comedy show. This is a comedy show.
Whatever. Yeah. Okay. But point being, right now with the Waltz, Kellogg, Gorka, Hegseth, program, he's got a logically incoherent message. He needs to dump those people. Well, not dump Pete Hegseth. He's actually good at what he's doing, and he's not a geopolitical guy. He's just a military guy, Anyway, but he needs to dump Kellogg and Gorka, in my opinion. Okay, not that anybody listens to me, but he needs to get a logically coherent. He needs to get a logically coherent program, and back the populist movements to get rid of those people. But to do that, like Mearsheimer was talking today, it's going to be tricky. Well, no, he needs to get out there and start talking about the Brzezinski-Wolfowitz plan has failed to completely stop Russian trade. Trump does not know any of this geopolitical history. He's a real estate guy. He does not know this. He's being misinformed. But he needs to change his message to the Brzezinski-Wolfowitz plan has failed to stifle Russian commerce, because that's what it's about. It's not about territory. It's about petroleum sales. He needs to get out with the American public and start getting his cabinet some talking points to start getting this message out to overcome 2 decades of propaganda.
George, that kind of ties into Drago's next article. We've got Trump's 90-day foreign aid moratorium. Bad news for both Kiev and the DNC, which ties into what you and I, George, were talking about in our last recording, where we were basically saying that this whole aid moratorium has killed the left's how should I say, infiltration of the 7 Ps in government, both domestically and internationally. Drago, do you want to tell us a bit about what this article actually says?
Yep. Well, I mean, this is something that, I mean, of course, you two have been talking about, and I've been talking about, and a lot of analysts have been talking about this. The point is, the so-called aid for Ukraine is pretty much a money laundering scheme to get a lot of money back into the coffers of the DNC and these other leftists, so-called leftists. I mean, they have nothing to do with leftism, but anyway, it's just pretty much a meaningless name. But let's call them leftist. So they need money, and they don't have donors, like, because no sane person is going to donate money to leftists, right? Now they need the money somehow, right? And they have this massive U.S. federal system at their disposal, and one of the best ways to do it is to proclaim that you're sending hundreds of billions of dollars to the Kiev regime, and then take the money back into the U.S. and put it in the private pockets of all these people. And of course, I mean, most of that money never left the U.S. I mean, they're not really crazy to send like billions of dollars in bills to Ukraine and then take it back to the U.S. because they wouldn't find it, because the Ukrainians are not corrupt at all. The money was actually just transferred from the accounts of the U.S. Federal government to the so-called Kiev regime, and then, of course, taken back to the coffers of the DNC and all these other people. And this is why Trump, cut the so-called Ukraine aid, because Trump understands that this was not done to help Ukraine. And Zelensky, I wrote this, much before Zelensky admitted it. Zelensky a few days ago admitted that of the $177 billion that he was supposed to get, they only got 72 billion. So there's $100 billion that is missing, right? And of course, it's not missing, but it's in the coffers of the DNC and these other people. So again, it's just a money laundering scheme, and Trump just shut that funnel down.
Yeah,
George?
he sure did. There's it is a money laundering scheme. And yeah, there's a lot more to go.
Yeah, of course.
The whole reason why they moved the EU east is the reason why you move a trading bloc east is specifically to erect tariff and non-tariff trade barriers. And what they're doing is they're separating the whole European peninsula from Russia. So in doing that, to put it back into geostrategic terms, they're using trading blocks to erect tariff and non-trade trade barriers in coordination with taking over the maritime choke points, the riverine choke points, and the land bridge connection routes, the terrestrial choke points. So when they moved NATO east, they moved it to Romania first, because then you're taking over the Danube River Valley and the Dniester River Valley and some of the other smaller rivers. You're taking over where those rivers hit the Black Sea, because then you're going to control those entry points so they can't receive oil tanker shipments through those rivers for resupply. So you're cutting off each one of those areas, but you're using a civilian mechanism in support of a military mechanism. So again, you're using the grand strategic level to influence the institutional military levels, but also the institutional executive branch agencies, not just the ones in the United States, but the mirror image counterparts overseas. That's how these operations work.
Russian propaganda.
Yeah. That, and I can read.
It never gets old. It never gets old.
Yeah.
George, yes, I agree with you. I don't know what to say. I'm sorry. More people don't see these videos and share your viewpoint and have gotten this thing to end earlier. Speaking of a neo-Nazi, fans of nuts, junta, which I don't know why we use that term, plans chemical and nuclear terrorist attacks. Former SBU agent says. What? They're like full out saying it, Drago?
Yeah,
Like
I mean, this guy he's a former SBU, and a lot of stuff he said was actually, turned out to be true. And he worked for the SBU until 2018, specifically from 1999 to 2018, and he actually saw how the CIA transformed the SBU from a national, intelligence organization that was Ukrainian into a CIA proxy, and he didn't like it. That's why he left. I mean, he had to leave because they were preparing his assassination. So he's getting a lot of, very secretive info that otherwise we wouldn't know about, and then he, essentially acts as a whistleblower. I'm amazed how this guy is even alive, but I mean, it's great. It's great, but the SBU is not doing a very good job by not neutralizing him. And of course, I really hope that they will never get the chance to do that, because this guy has warned us about so many things that we didn't even know about. For instance, I just want to remind people, back in 2024, I think in August, if I'm not mistaken, these guys, the SBU actually tried to organize an assassination attempt on the French President Macron in order to blame the Russians, because he was visiting Kiev at the time.
I remember that. I remember that.
So these guys are crazy, and this guy is actually talking about it, but of course the news media and the legacy media are simply trying to stifle any sort of info that he's putting out. I'm trying my best to, of course, present it to the public. And he actually found evidence that, and of course, this was also, he also forwarded this to the Russians, that the SBU was planning these dirty bomb attacks and chemical attacks in order to slow down the Russians, or the other option is to present them as Russian attacks. So these would be false flag operations to denigrate the Russians and say how bad they are, and how they're
losing forward so bad. They're losing forward so bad that they need to use dirty nukes, because their nukes don't work because they're old and Russian, basically.
Exactly. So it's Soviet junk. It doesn't work. That's it.
George, you agree, obviously, because you're from Texas. So we're just gonna skip your opinion on dirty nukes. Kremlin unfazed by threats of additional sanctions and pressure. This, on the other hand, George, you can speak to. This is basically what you've been saying, that Putin doesn't care.
I wrote this on January 24, like much before the Kremlin started reacting. To me, this is why I agree with George 100%. Like, there's no way in hell that the Russians are just gonna budge, due to more sanctions after like 14,000 sanctions have been implemented.
I'm gonna put you two on screen, and then you two can talk to each other about it. We've got new scenes here. Watch. Now you two can talk to each other about it. How Putin doesn't care. George, chime in.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we already talked about this we already recorded a couple of shows today. But yeah, no, for this one, I keep on saying I'm flabbergasted that Pete Hegseth's video or his speech today, his presentation at the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. I had to not use an acronym there. That was very tough. But anyway, he gave that. It was just mind-boggling, because they still think that that Ukraine war is or Russia invaded Ukraine rather for no reason, rather than the United States or the collective West is trying to shut off all Russian trade. Okay. So they accomplished the goal. They accomplished their goal, and now the European economies are collapsing. Putin doesn't have to do anything now. They got exactly what they wished for. I mean, this is unbelievable. It's unbelievably stupid. And the thing is, Trump picked people that don't know anything about geopolitics to run his geopolitics. I love the rest of everything else that Trump is doing. I mean, I love Doge. I mean, these programs should have been wiped out decades ago. I mean, I love one part 3/4 of his advisors are doing a great job. It's just his foreign policy advisors don't know anything about the history of foreign policy. It's unbelievable. If you want door kickers, if you want pipe hitters, yeah, they got the right guys, but they're out of their league as far as the grand strategic level. I'll end it there.
Yep, couldn't agree more. I mean, it's pretty clear that Trump and his guys have been used to dealing with people who are not on their level, who are like essentially slaves or satellites or vassals. And of course, the Russians are not that. The Russians are not going to budge due to sanctions or economic pressure, because Russia just doesn't work that way. Russia is a much more different country than the U.S. in that regard, and they will continue pushing back. I mean, losing forward. Sorry.
Yeah, well, because if Kellogg, to my understanding, and I could be wrong, we'll have to wait a couple of days till that summit conference, happens. But apparently, he's going around Europe trying to convince European politicians to back his plan. Well, okay, they will. But the person who he needs to convince isn't the European leaders, it's Putin. And Putin's not going to go for that. He's going to tell them, you put NATO armed personnel, call them peacekeepers, mercenaries, whatever you want to call them, you put them there, they're going to be destroyed. Because he's been saying that for 2 decades. He was adamant about that at the 2007 Munich NATO conference. Same thing in Bucharest. He said that they moved it. Okay, they already had Saakashvili elected in Georgia in 2004, 2005-ish, and they started to restrict Russian trade then, and then he invaded into Abkhazia and South Ossetia because he needs to control that the logistical supply route of that tunnel underneath the Caucasus Mountains. And in Abkhazia, you're controlling, terrestrial land bridge is always the point between the mountains and the sea, or the mountains and the river. That's why I keep on going back to maritime choke points, riverine checkpoints, and terrestrial land bridge choke points, because those are the areas that one side or the other needs to move into right away to control the logistical supply routes. So that's what Putin did. And the reason why I say that is because that is obvious military reaction no matter who's doing it.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Just some random maps of I couldn't find the one I'm looking for with all of the mineral wealth of Russia that is obviously not enough for them, which is why they're going attacking everyone and all the land that they don't have, because they want the land. It must be the land. You guys just don't understand. It's the land. We've gone over an hour. Huh?
Russia doesn't need more territory. They need that particular territory where their seaport is. And that's exactly where NATO put its weapons and armed those people of that 1930s ideology and aimed them right at Rostov-on-Don and aimed them right at Crimea, where the Black Sea Fleet is. And then they're shocked that Putin responds to that with a military counter strategy. No, they did that on purpose.
I'm provoked.
Yeah,
if I put a knife to your face and I don't actually touch you, I'm not provoking you. The knife is just centimeters away from your face, but I'm not provoking you. It's self-defense, bro. Krav Maga style. In any case, we've got 2 more articles, and these are too good to cut out of this one. So of course Drago sent me another 15. We're gonna get to that in another recording. But we've got another 2 that I've opened already for this one. Where is Bosch plus TV? There we go. Western coping mechanisms at full throttle to denigrate Russian hypersonic weapons. Zircon. What, Drago, is this Russian propaganda that you've got for us here?
Well, this is specifically about what Trump was saying about Russia stealing, supposedly stealing American hypersonic weapons projects. So I really had, because I see a lot of media talking about it, and it's just ridiculous. I mean, so essentially what Trump is claiming, I mean, as George said, there's a lot of stuff I agree with him, right? I mean, he's done a lot of the good stuff, but there are things I vehemently disagree with him, and this is one of those. Because, like, how the hell do you explain the claim that the Russians stole your projects when you don't have them, right? It's not like the U.S. military had just one copy and then the Russians, the evil Russians sent a spy and stole it, and now the U.S.
I was just gonna say
any.
that's proof. Like, if I have this coffee and then all of a sudden it shows up at your place, it's obviously you stole the coffee, and I don't have the coffee anymore. Same with hypersonic missiles.
It's just ridiculous. I mean, I understand. Sure, if you look at the Chinese J-31, or now it's called the J-35, it looks like the fucking F-35. You know it was copied from the F-35. That's it, right? We know that. And of course, many of the Chinese have actually admitted that they stole a bunch of data from Lockheed Martin and then used it to build the J-31 or J-35, whatever you want to call it. But I mean, if you have something and the other guy doesn't have it, how can you claim it that the other guy was, robbed and this was taken from him? Because I mean, it's not a one thing, it's a hypersonic technology. Like, it involves a bunch of institutions working together in order to make these missiles work. And it's just ridiculous. And then in this article, people, if they want to, know the details, they can read it. I mentioned all the sorts of hypersonic missiles that Russia has that the U.S. doesn't have, like, even remotely, or even on paper in some cases. And the Russians have always been very good in propulsion technology. The Soviet Union was around 50 years ahead of everyone else in hypersonic technology in the 70s, and it's no surprise that Russia is still leading the world in this technology.
George, you got anything to say on hypersonic weapons?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I go to the game theory conferences, the Russians have always have always produced a ton of very great mathematical theoreticians. So that's the part that they've always had right. Yeah, you can't do anything with the communist system because it's too static. But they switched over to a market system, and now they're getting funding. Yeah, now they're actually reaching the full potential of their engineering capabilities. So yes, they are. The United States has high-tech weapons. If the stories are true about some of the more exotic type of stuff, again, just rumors, I don't know. But
you mean like the anti-gravity stuff that's floating around now with the
I just whatever the rumors are. So if those are true, what does that mean? Well, that means the United States is planning to do these, alien type weapons because we can't field an army anymore in a multicultural system, and all this DEI and wokeness stuff. So now they're going to use the wonder weapons so they don't have to declare war. But it's not even. It's an economic war. They can't win an economic, or we can't win an economic war. So now you're going to turn it into some kind of apocalypse war. I mean, some of these neocons are just insane where they're willing to take this to. You're going to losing an economic war to the Chinese. See, I like what Trump is doing with the reciprocal trade policy of whatever their tariffs are, our tariffs are going to be, because the United States cannot exist with its current account imbalances and its trade deficits. That's been going on for my entire adult life, basically. So he's finally doing something about that. He's using Doge to cut back stupid spending. So I really love all of those things that he's doing. But as George Herbert Walker Bush 41 was saying, some of these, the crazies in the bottom of the Pentagon, was his words, need to be either locked up in the bottom of the Pentagon, or they should just be, they need to be massively retired. Because yes, it seems like, well, it's not seems like they're willing to kill 1 million people to win an economic war. They've already been doing that. And yeah, they're ready to escalate it. It's like insane, because they could have acquired all the rare earth minerals that they wanted in Ukraine with joint ventures. And when people realize they're trying to subvert the regular economic processes with all of this, by using the EU to put up trade tariff barriers, to put these oligarchs in power so they can get more of the profits and control the direction of those profits to the city of London, not to stay in Kiev. The more people understand, the more that this situation is rigged. These people are just evil, in my mind, because the Americans are really taught, oh no, we're here for democracy, man. I mean, it's so beyond insane right now.
I have no idea what you're talking about, George. Drago looks just about as confused. I think we should just move on to the next article and get this recording out of the way. EU, NATO's impotent rage as Lukashenko secures another victory for Belarus.
Yeah, well, Lukashenko was pretty much trolling them all throughout the entire election process, and especially after the election. That's a mistake in the title. There was supposed to be a hyphen or something. EU NATO is still not one organization, even though it effectively is. But anyway, I don't want to digress. But the whole point is,
if you ask George, we've discussed this many times, that EU NATO is one organization. Basically,
it is. I meant just the name. I usually just put a hyphen so that people know the difference, but it pretty much, for all intents and purposes, it is one organization. So, and of course, they were furious that democracy didn't win in Belarus, and that the local dictator got his way. And I'm not sure if YouTube is following the new guidelines that Trump pretty much put in force. But he once said it's better to be a dictator than one of the alphabet people. So I'm not sure if I should say it. I don't want to get you banned or whatever. So
it's okay. Yeah, perfect segue.
Yeah, you said it. It's okay. It rhymes with it's okay. So
perfect segue.
Are you talking about the Culinary Institute of America?
Right, exactly.
The group of chefs.
Right.
I guess that's what they are.
Yeah.
If that's what you want to call them. As you guys may have guessed, this is not eligible for monetization. This channel has never been. If you want to, you can buy me a coffee. Also, thank you to everyone who has been supporting me on the Patreon. Thank you to Drago. Thank you to George, who have graced us with their humor and their presence. Do you have any closing remarks, either of you? Do you want to say something, George?
No. Well, let me close it out on this one point. We've talked about it before on their shows. When the United States was under the Articles of Confederation, it was complete chaos with no free trade between the states. After World War II, the globalists took over. They're like, well, how can we replicate this? Because the European countries really don't get along. There's a lot of antagonisms. It's very much like the Articles of Confederation of the United States before we adopted the Constitution and became a federal country. So they took the European Coal and Steel Union, and they created it evolved into the European Union. So that way they can control all the European countries and organize them and connect them directly to NATO. So that's how those things are connected. And that's why the EU exists, is so City of London and Wall Street can control Europe.
No idea what you're talking about, George. Sounds like a really good joke that you heard somewhere on some subway. Drago, did you hear any good jokes on the subway somewhere that you want to tell us as we round off this recording?
Well, I mean, I think we've mentioned more than enough of them in this recording. I just want to say I'm really, honored to have been in the same recording with George, and it's, I hope we get the chance to do more of this in the future.
Yeah, if Working Brother could, pull
Get
his
to
head
work.
out of his. Yeah, get to work. Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Get to work. Yeah.
We've got a meme
Do this
here.
for us.
I was working and I made this meme. If you know, you know. We'll see what this bears as far as fruit is concerned. Everybody who stuck around to the end, like, share, subscribe. Thank you, George. Thank you, Drago. See you around, everyone. Peace.